Nestled on the shores of Mississippi's Gulf Coast, the town of Ocean Springs has earned a reputation for its vibrant community of artists. Its identity traces back to Walter Anderson, a naturalist painter who operated shearwater pottery with his brother Peter until 1965.
He was rowing that boat out to Horn Island and back, throwing his art in a trash can to try and keep it dry. He was painting on typewriter paper. Art wasn't the purpose. Art was a byproduct.
You know, he was not, people didn't recognize his art at all when he was alive. And they thought he was the most peculiar creature, but now there are artists all over the place. I like it being so lively.
We spoke to some of the town's local artists to learn about the meaning behind their work.
I made it almost 2 years, but I did get, I was expelled. I was given a general discharge. Well, I was a medic, see, and I think what got me mostly in trouble was the way they treated the patients in the hospital, in the military hospital. They didn't have advocate in that day, so they were just victim of whatever the doctors, nurses were doing to them. They didn't have nobody to, no way to have a dispute. I went back to Pennsylvania briefly, met a girl, fell in love, got engaged. Family broke us up. The parents didn't approve of me. They were going to have me arrested, so I jumped. I got in my car, Morris Minor truck, and drove to New Orleans.
We were spending our life savings, actually. We moved to Italy when Stuart was 4 or 5, 3, and we lived there for 2 years. That was my primary art education. We moved there specifically so I can go to the Florence Academy of Art. And this specific school, it's like in downtown medieval Florence. I'm walking down these cobblestone streets after dropping Stuart and Macaulay, her brother, off at their Italian public school. I would drop them off, and then I'd walk down these cobblestone streets that literally Michelangelo walked on. It's his the Medicis were there, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, they all sort of were artists in this town. And so the very streets that they walked on, maybe not the very cobblestones, because maybe those have been replaced over the last couple hundred years, but the actual streets. So, the actual buildings, the churches and stuff that they would have worshipped in or whatever were still there, So all that was extremely inspiring. And we were not making any money while we were going there. So
it's unlike the art that's being done today, but I believe that if you surround yourself with beauty, you as a person become beautiful. So I want my work to always have a positive aspect about it. I don't like what some of the artists are doing today in the respect that it's real ugly. And I try to keep it positive at all costs, no matter what. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and so my reflection of my childhood, my past, was always positive, and that's all I know. So I can't paint anything that's not positive and happy.
And I was a self-taught artist, so I needed more training. So I went out in Jackson Square and tried to learn portraiture. So I lived like a bohemian life, cheap apartments, cheap food, working, trying to learn how to do portraits, being a beatnik, a hippie, whatever you want to call it, goofing around, having adventures. Didn't have a bathroom, shower. Your shower was down the hall. It was like in a flop house, but there's all artists in there too. So I lived like that. Lived just very bare bones. Didn't care about anything material. You just wanted to practice art.
I always drew as a child. We always were around this Anderson art, or my grandfather Walter and his brothers Mac and Peter. We were immersed in it, surrounded by great artists and fabulous work. So it felt right when I went out there and worked with my brother Mark's houseboat as a guide fisherman. I went out with some crayons a girlfriend had given me, and found out that I had no paper. And all that was there on the houseboat were paper plates that we fed the clients, the fishermen, on. So I started doing round designs on the plates and came in and I showed them to my mama and my Uncle Jimmy, the master potter here at Shearwater, James Anderson. He said, well, Chris, you ought to try putting them on pottery plates, your circular designs. So I did, and I started selling them, and it felt right, it made me feel happy, and I had a purpose all of a sudden, because I knew I didn't want to fish for a living all my life.
You need to make something that makes you interested in what you're doing, or makes you passionate about what you're doing, and what is it that makes you special, where you live, what you do. And I've always been a boat person, living on the Gulf Coast. You travel every weekend, you go out to Horn Island, or you go fishing in a boat, or you get on the water in a boat. So a boat was kind of a vessel that I enjoyed. They have rough on the outside, but they're kind of shiny and pretty on the inside, which is kind of our souls. But they can get ornate. And I have a bird on this one too, but they can be plain, they can be big or little. Some have glass in them. I mean, they're just everywhere. They can be fired in a wood kiln, which is these for. I'll go to different places and use the kilns. I use them just for everything. But these have shells on them and ropes. I mean, I have them everywhere, but they're kind of my signature piece, and I still love making them. They don't bore me, and I still think I have a story to tell with them, so I'm using them as a metaphor for life, and how life picks up and spans out.
Over time, I kind of wrestled with different artists, and when you study them, they become part of you, and so I think they speak through my work. Others are Kandinsky and Klee. They were German expressionists. Always liked Franz Marc. It's sort of sad. Franz Marc died in World War I. He was an exciting German painter, and I always loved his image, the blue horses. And I think Marc, probably more than anyone else, taught me how to be arbitrary with color, even though I'm pretty consistent when I draw. I tend to use a lot of the same colors, but I do not strictly conform to what the world is showing me. I like to have my colors, represent things. Like the trunks of most trees are red to me. I'm helped along by that which I like, and I would be remiss to say in 1974 or so, when I was in college at South Alabama, an artist friend of mine was visiting, and my roommate, he showed me the book they found. It was called Outsider Art by Roger Cardinal, and of course that's a very important book, which had a new premise that we hadn't thought of, which is the idea that the greatest art is the most fundamental art made by people who are so, frankly, when you're really mentally off, you've divorced yourself from the art market, you've divorced yourself from trying to find an audience, you are making what might be considered the most raw and the most primal art.
My grandmother raised us with sort of a philosophy that unless you did music or art or you wrote, you weren't really alive. She would meet people here in the showroom and she would say, "What do you do?" And if they said, "Oh, I'm a banker, I'm a lawyer, I'm this, that, or the other," she would just go away back to her house. She would come back in a little while to find somebody who did something.
She said she preferred the goats to the sheep. And I think that's what she meant by that. Were they interesting and different, or were they ones that followed the flock, so to speak? I guess. No, she thinks she
I
knows.
think so.
I prefer the goats to the sheep. She said. That always tickled me. I do too. I prefer goats to sheep myself.
This is one of the students I just taught recently at Alabama Art Colony. And this is another Jerry Allen over there and one of his plates. And this is Craig Brumfield. He's probably one of the most talented artists in Ocean Springs at this time. People, when tourists come here from Ocean Springs, they like to take something back with them, and they really like fish paintings, they like pelican paintings, they like the Horn Island and our kind of livelihood down here. So there's a lot of that going on.
The basic thing that they teach you is really just kind of how to see differently. You know, they try to teach you nuances of, you know, sight. Because you think, you know, we all have eyeballs and a brain. We think that we kind of all see the same thing, but really, you know, a lot of that depends on, you know, what you're taught to kind of pay attention to. And if you're not taught to pay attention to certain things, you may not be aware of how important they are. We would have, you know, say a human model that I would draw with charcoal, black and white, no color, no paint, just charcoal and paper, and that model would hold the same pose for 5 weeks. You know, so for 3 hours a day, for 5 weeks, 5 days a week, and you know, so it gives me a lot of time, all these students, a lot of time to really start to explore and draw, you know, every value change, every sort of turn of the form and what have you. So you spend a whole year doing that, which is what I did. You start to appreciate and understand light in a way that I was not aware of before. So, you know, when I came back, we were there for 2 years. When I came back, you know, everything about how I saw, you know, had changed. Everything about what I paid attention to.
I suffered a concussion when I was a child, when I was about 7 years old. I had an aunt that knocked me out with a wrench, knocked me unconscious. Oh yeah. And when I woke up, I was being knocked out. I saw the world differently. You know, everything was in extreme detail. So I got fascinated with detail, and I started flunking grades because I could stare at wood grain on a desk. At that time, we had wood desks. And I could stare at the wood grain on a desk, school desk, and I was in another world, you know.
In 1950, 49 or 50, he went to China and he walked across China during the revolution. At one point, one moment he was surrounded by Shanghai Shek's soldiers, the regular army. And the next day he might be surrounded by Mao Zedong's army. He was in China in this moment of turmoil. And it changed him. Before China, he was an artist who was seeking artistic vision so that he would become a better artist. After China, there was a 180-degree shift in his purpose. And that shift is expressed in that quotation that I gave you. Art is incredible, not for itself, but in changing the artist's relation to other things. Perspective. Before China, he was seeking artistic vision as a tool to make his art better. After China, his art was a tool to help him achieve greater artistic vision. After China, his art became incredibly more powerful, although it was already powerful before. After China, it took on this new element, this new power.
Then I got hit in the head with another wrench, and it was called Katrina. After Katrina, I lost all the interest in detail work, and I began doing abstracts.
After Katrina, I spent, several years painting those things, painting the actual hurricane and the after effects of it.
It was sort of like being swept clean, and you just wanted to do more. You wanted to do more. And of course it always helps once you start painting or drawing. It's a way of digesting life, and it's good for you. I think it helped everybody. All the artists I know were stimulated by it. Loss does stimulate.
Losing all my equipment for the etching was pretty much did it. Destroyed my, was completely flooded out. Pretty much lost everything. Although I did restore some things, but so I didn't have those tools to work with. So and now I was having problems with my nerves. So I knew that art, I could calm myself down doing some so much more expressive art. I didn't have patience to. My nerves were bad. I probably had post-traumatic stress or something, and I'm not pretty sure I did. And so to do something detailed, to concentrate, I couldn't do it. So I just started projecting abstraction out of my subconscious.
Yes, I had 6.5 feet of water in my house, and my studio was trashed. It went down. So, and I did not have this studio. I had a little dumpy carport studio that was totally torn down and thrown away. And after about 1.5 years of not having any place to work, my son and I built this with our own hands. And I got a nice grant from the Andy Warhol Foundation to help me buy 2 new kilns and some supplies. And without Katrina, I wouldn't have this lovely building, which I'm very grateful for. But it did change my view on the world tremendously. And it's still with me.
Well, here we lost almost everything. I lost my house, which was down on the front here. I lost all of my journals, 45 journals I kept most of my life, they were all gone. And it was like sort of starting over again a new life. And sort of losing. I started writing a great deal more memoir-like things, trying to remember, trying to reclaim what I'd lost. And that really didn't work.
My mother was diagnosed with cancer, and she was my biggest patron and encourager, and so she wrote a little story about how boats are resilient. Boats are a wonderful metaphor for the human condition. They take long and short voyages. They age and they weather. They get beaten around and they get repaired. They are fragile yet resilient, buoyant and indomitable. Without oars or tiller, they remind us how often we are aimlessly adrift, making us somewhat unprepared for the next port of call. They offer us a vessel to sail into the next life. That was for my mother. Or be it college, marriage, or the afterlife.
It's a real sort of oxymoron in that in general we have a negative reputation simply from civil rights era in particular. But at the same time, nobody can deny all the great people that Mississippi has produced in terms of writers and singers, songwriters.
Of all the cities and towns in Mississippi, I think the best work that's being done right now, and I know I may be partial, but not really, I think the major art that's being done in Mississippi is being done here in Ocean Springs and along the Gulf Coast.
Every community has something that they can sell. Every community has something that makes them special.
He had noticed in China that each little village had a piece of art which gave that village its own separate, unique identity. And Ocean Springs had just built the community center. So he said, my God, I can give my community a source of identity, a unique identity. I can play a role in giving my community identity. And so he gave 2 years, basically 2 years of his life at the peak of his career to the community where he lived, to Ocean Springs.